everyone knows, right? Everybody's had their own personal experience with this pandemic, right? And whether it's personal or whether it's, from a corporate standpoint, we've seen millions of people lose their jobs. I wanted to convey to my team that we have their back, right? And so some kids didn't feel comfortable coming back to work. That's fine. We totally respect that. We're gonna hold your job until you're ready to come back. Some kids didn't feel comfortable, with people coming in, right? Remember, we're not a really big unit. Like our typical square footage is 800 to 1,000 square feet. So between, our employees and our tables and our staff, like you can't really do seating. So what do? We took all the seating out. We said, look, come enjoy some ice cream, but you're going to have to take that out. And all of that is driven by my employees, right? If I can't keep my employees happy and motivated and feeling like I have their back, how am I going to expect them then to treat a customer right? And I think that's just something that I've always felt is important, right? Regardless of where you're at, right? And I think we've all been part of those experiences going into a restaurant where you can tell where the manager treats their employees right, and you can tell when they're not, and it kind of you kind of feel that in the experience, right? And so we've been fortunate enough that all of our employees stayed with us. We did have to close the store down for a little bit because one of them tested positive. We sent everyone home. We tested them all back then before testing was free. We closed the store down, then we reopened it when we were ready. But even today, I'll be honest with you, a year in, we don't have in-store dining. Our employees, we're like, look, we tell our customers, come in the store. We're letting them come in now. Before, we actually had to register at the door. But listen, somewhat, I got to be honest with you, looking at what's happening up in Massachusetts, at least we could say we had the business open. There were businesses that have been closed down for months, right? Yeah. So, but at the same time, we had to take some extreme precautions, and some people were coming and crowding up in front of the door. So we introduced order online, pick up in store, so that people can literally order from their home and just pick it up. We had to basically partner with a whole mess of other delivery platforms. We really had to look at shifting our revenue model and our business model to say, what are people doing today? And how do we capitalize on it, but at the same time, stay afloat, right? And we've been fortunate enough to actually find success in that experience.
David, what have you learned from this pandemic with your business right now? Like, there's a lot of businesses that had a plan 2 or 3 years from now to go to something like mobile ordering, but they were kind of pushed into it now. So what kind of things have you learned from this that it's going to help you that you may have not have seen? I mean, you've got a tremendous amount of leadership that spans many years of experience that you've had, but sometimes we don't actually see that next move. And you're like, oh Christ, like this outside dining now, that's opened up a ton of like space for, restaurants where they added capacity rate that they otherwise wouldn't have, right, in the normal days.
I don't mean to cut you off, Dave, but we never introduced what your business is.
Yeah. So
you know what? I like to talk about your business and what exactly it is, so that might help people understand.
David? He does it. He does it on to me on purpose. He does it on purpose, like every time. He did that to me. Stop.
You gotta explain someone's business. I don't know what it is. The people are gonna be like, "What does he have? Like, is he serving popcorn or is he serving ice cream?"
You're the one who asked him about the pandemic, and then here you are right now, and you jump on me.
Oh my God! Here we go. Brian, mute him.
So here, I'm going to moderate. Ready, Dave?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Dave, what I want you to do is I want you to answer Brett's question first. It's a good question. And then maybe go talking about your company, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, look, so one of the big lessons we've learned is that you have to keep nimble, right? And I think that becomes extremely hard the bigger you get. I've been part of some multinational corporations where this pandemic and making the immediate changes we made in 24, 48 hours in my company would have taken months. That order online, pick up in store, adding other delivery platforms, coming out with new sizes for home delivery and quart sizes. All of these things I've been able to do because I've kept because of the size of the company and because of what we've been able to build here. I've been able to do that very quickly. And so that in essence is something that I've really learned moving forward. That is a little bit of a concern because I want to grow, but I know that as I grow, some of those changes are going to become difficult. And so my challenge as I grow this company is, how do I grow a company, but stay nimble enough that I can make immediate changes and shifts when situations arise like that? Now, to Derek.
See that, Derek, that was an awesome, David, that was an unbelievable answer. And I'm glad you answered it the way you did.
Well, I was trying to tie it to his business so he can explain
don't
how he's
stop.
changed it.
Yeah,
But
man.
go ahead. You know what,
And,
Dave? It's your podcast. Please answer the question. I'm not going to interrupt anymore because, God forbid, I try to give you props to your business to find out what
man,
exactly
We've
it
already
is.
talked enough.
I appreciate it, man. And look, I like to think of this as a bunch of high school buddies getting together and talking about what they have going on. And so I'm in the ice cream business, but more specifically, I'm in the nitrogen ice cream business. And what that is for your listeners who don't understand is, for hundreds of years, ice cream has been made in a factory, then frozen, shipped out in freezers to stores, stuck in a bucket. And then when you come into the store, you select the bucket of the ice cream you want, and then they scoop it out and they serve it to you. We basically brought that manufacturing plant into the store. So we are literally getting the cream or the dairy directly from the farms, and we're literally pouring the dairy in a bowl, adding the flavor. The nitrogen, the liquid nitrogen, is what freezes that instantly at negative 320 degrees and turns it into ice cream like that. So you are getting a custom, ready-to-made, freshest ice cream you can get right there, made to order. So that's kind of basically what I do. And my company, I like to say, it's called Chillin' Nitrogen Ice Cream. It's based down here in Miami, Florida. I'm the CEO and partner and of the company, and we have 8 locations right now. And so we're looking at franchising. So I was literally brought in by the founders because of my franchising background.
So to follow up on that, Dave, maybe talk a little about the founders, because the website certainly.
He's got more important things, right? Though he's
In fact, I'm jealous.
I hope
I'm jealous. For the listeners, he's pouring some vino.
He's
I don't
got
blame him. He
nitrogen.
needs it. He needs it after this one. So
He's got
talk about the
nitrogen wine
founders.
going over there.
And then also, is there one in Nashua? So maybe it's locally, what's the presence, and talk about the founding.
Yeah, look, so the founders started this back in 2012. The founder was basically a graduate out of the University of Florida, went up to Jacksonville area, saw this business being done by hand. So someone was pouring nitrogen into a bowl and was like, holy crap, there's nothing like this in Miami. And let me bring this down. So he came down here, got in basically the garage of his parents, and basically started devising formulas on how to create ice cream through using liquid nitrogen. Opened up the first store in 2012 and has grown it to, multiple units. It got to the point where they were getting so much interest that they said, look, the best way to grow this is franchising. And that's kind of how they basically met me. And they said, look, if I need to grow this, I need to find somebody who's an expert at this. And given my background and what I've done over the last 20 plus years in franchising, that's really where we met up. I live in Miami, they live in Miami. And it was just a click since we met. So it's been a really nice relationship because they understand the industry extremely well. And so I'm not going to be able to learn in the 2 years that I've been here, what they've been able to develop in 9 years from the technology and from the ice cream. But what I do know really, really, really well is how to grow a company, especially through franchising, right? And so that's kind of where we partnered up and we've grown. We don't have any stores outside of Florida at the moment. There are other brands doing what we're doing. Our niche, to be honest with you, our competitive advantage is that we've been able to develop software and hardware to automate a lot of that process. Mm-hmm. And so in a world today where, you're trying to cut costs everywhere you can, we can have one employee making 4 ice creams at once. You know what I mean? And that's where our advantage comes in, where everywhere else you probably have to either pour it by hand, each one, or you have to press a button.
Exactly. I know we're all like Massachusetts people, but obviously this with podcasts you can listen to anywhere across the country and the world and so on. So there's probably some of our listeners that may exist on in Florida. Like, what locations are you down there in cities and towns?
Yeah, so our first location is in a city called Pinecrest, and then we opened one up in Aventura. We're in Fort Lauderdale. We're in South Beach, right off of Lincoln Road. We just opened up our latest one actually during the pandemic, and that's an interesting story, but we opened up our latest one in Coconut Grove, which is another one. We have one in Coral Springs and one in
That's where my sister lives. That's where Jen lives.
Oh, really?
Coral Springs. I'll have to tell her to go check it out.
No way.
When I'll do it, I go, but yes, that's where she
I
lives.
bet you she's been. I mean, so interesting enough.
If not, when I go out there, we'll go together.
Yeah,
We'll drop your name. We'll see if we can get a discount.
Yeah. I went to school growing up with Jen, and great memories growing up with her. I didn't know she was down here, so nice to know.
So Dave, my background. I'm big into business development, acquisition, and growth.
Oh.
We didn't really talk about what your studies were at BU. I think you were a finance major. So how did you go from wanting to be on Wall Street,
Yep,
which is money management, right? Essentially, over to franchising, because they're not the same. I mean, there's obviously businesses involved, but you went from one thing to another. Where did that shift happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So where I focus primarily in JP Morgan is mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling companies with a focus in Latin America. So JP Morgan had the #1 practice in Latin America. And so, I mean, kudos to my parents. I was born, speaking Spanish. I one of great qualifications here. I got to work for JP Morgan. I had to join their M&A group focused in Latin America. And so for the first 2 years of my professional career, I basically spent the entire time traveling through Latin America, helping buy and sell companies and creating Excel sheets on how to value a company. Right around that time, the 2-year mark, you have a decision in investment banking. You either go back to business school, or you, at the time, if you remember the late 90s, the dot-com era, that was when things were getting crazy with the whole dot-com piece. Some of my friends went down and they were starting a company in Florida. And so I got a call from a friend of mine who actually worked with me at JP Morgan. And she's like, hey, look, before you think about business school, why don't you come down here and check out what we're building down here in Miami and maybe see if you like it. I came down to Miami. It was probably November in New York. Came down to Miami, checked out the company, really liked what they were doing, ironically enough, in the food space, but they were creating kind of a B2B exchange. If you remember the B2C, they were in the B2B market, and spent one day in Miami with the weather and was like, yeah, I think I'm coming here. Joined that, literally helped raise money, sold that company, and decided I want to stay in Miami. And guess who was hiring and developing an M&A group in their department, finance department? Burger King Corporation.
Yeah, I remember you said that you were working.
And so Burger King is based out of Miami. Sure enough, they were looking for some guys. My resume looked really appealing to them. I joined them. And what I ended up doing for them for a couple years was selling hundreds of stores that were distressed to private equity groups, right? And so private equity groups would come in, buy disastrous stores that nobody wanted, but they were buying them at pennies at the dollar, do a paint job, put some CapEx in it, put a great operator in it, and then literally within 2 years, turn it around and sell it, right? And so, Brian, you know how that works, right? In the hotel industry, same thing. But I ended up getting introduced to the franchising department because I was talking so much to private equity groups that the head of franchising for Burger King said, hey, if you're interested, finance, you're pretty good at talking to people. Why don't you come join me in the franchising department and you could do this for a living? And that's literally my first introduction into specifically doing franchising. The one advantage I've been able to have, and it's been something that I've been able to carry with me throughout my entire career, is that finance background, that strong financial background is something that has really carried me because, in sales, you have sales guys, and then they typically have to pass you over to somebody else when things get too technical, whether you're in technology.
Exactly. Once the technology comes in.
Right. You're like, bye, I got to bring in my guy. And in the restaurant business, it usually was, as soon as these guys started talking about EBITDA, profitability, margins, metrics, they expect me to, hand them over. And I'm like, no, let's talk. Come on. What do you got? What do you, let's look at P&Ls. Let's look at, and so I have a really good understanding of P&Ls. And so that's really how I got into franchising. And, interesting enough, I was moving up the corporate ladder at Burger King and not fast enough for me. And, I think everybody's kind of faced this experience. I had a great boss, but, he wanted me to stay at a certain level. And I kept getting high marks on my reviews. And finally, it looked like he wasn't going to promote me. And another company came and said, hey, I'm going to give you a lot of money. I'm going to make you a director. And that was Wendy's and Arby's. And that's how I started moving.
Well, you'll be happy to know there's a Burger King in Haverhill now. You'll be happy to know.
Oh, yeah?
There's one over in the Haverhill Plaza.
Funny about Burger King is if you watch the History Channel, Food That Built America, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I didn't realize they did one with Burger King, how Burger King started and how it was based out of Miami. They were called like Burger King. It was something like Top Burger King chips. They weren't called Burger King at first. Right. But it was interesting how they challenged, and it talks about how franchising and talks about with McDonald's and Burger King went up against each other. It's an interesting show because it talks about Burger King, how they started going head to head with McDonald's to try to take over.
Yeah. Look, I think one of the interesting thing, and actually they may not have mentioned this, but I was at Burger King when they decided to buy Jacksonville from the original people who came up with the idea for Burger King were actually up in Jacksonville. But these guys from Miami came up and said, hey, we like your idea. Why don't we bring it down to Miami? Similar to McDonald's, not that different.
Oh, okay.
What the family in Jacksonville was able to negotiate was like, hey, you guys can do that, but we want to retain all ownership of Jacksonville. So any stores that we open in Jacksonville will be the master franchisor of Jacksonville. And I was at Burger King when they finally purchased that from the original family or investment group. But like many things, a lot of founders don't end up being sometimes the guys who take it, national. And that's why kudos to the guys who could stick around, right? The guys who we see today that are there from the beginning to end. Because if you look at companies, especially when private equity and big investors start coming in play, they look at it as there's a different investor from that 0 to 1 million, 10 million mark. And then they need a different type of leader from the 10 million to 50 million mark. And then they need a different leader from different mark. And so, that's kind of how, these things happen.
So one of the things that I've learned with franchising is, unfortunately, you can't just buy one. You gotta do several. So is that the same with your company? You gotta come in and have multiple locations that you're opening, or you guys, because you're maybe smaller.
I think when you're smaller and you're starting out, you tend to kind of be okay with kind of those single units, right? And so I will tell you this though. There definitely are what you call economies of scale that you realize as an investor when you can open multiple stores, right? Because now that manager of that first store that you're paying, $40,000, $50,000 to, he now becomes the manager of 2 stores. And then he becomes the area manager of 3 stores. You're not paying him 3 times more, you know what I mean? When you open 3 stores. And so you do end up making more profit as you open more, but yeah, there is a barrier of entry sometimes, Brian, to people who are like, damn, I want to open 1, not 3, but yeah, we're open to having people open 1. It's just, we have to make sure that they understand that we don't have the money to go up and visit you if you're up in Haverhill,
There's a spot here. Right? Send your real estate guys up.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, funny story enough, I've gotten a couple leads through my Facebook posts. I've gotten a couple leads from Haverhill over time, and honestly, more often than not, I'm just talking franchising with people. And so I tend to really just talk franchising. And if somebody expresses an interest in my brand, great. And if somebody just wants to talk about another brand, that's great.
So I want to talk about the pet company you were with. What brought you there? Were you like a pet person that would be really cool to be a part of it, or what brought you in that direction?
That was a private equity. The last several positions I found was pretty much private equity groups who want to grow a company and need a franchising expert to come in. And so that's a company that's been around 20 plus years. They have a big company portfolio of stores. They probably had 100 plus company stores, but they only had, maybe 50 odd franchise stores. And without getting really too into the weeds, when you go to sell a company, if it's a franchise concept, it gets sold for much, much more than if it's not a franchise concept. And that's because you can grow a franchise concept much faster because guess what? You're using other people's money, right? In a nutshell. So what they came to me with is saying, look, we want to sell this company in a couple years. We need you to come in, develop the franchising department because it's really not where it needs to be. And we need you to ramp it up so that when we go to other private equity groups and sell it, that's it. Now, it does help that I love pets. Yeah, I do love pets, but ultimately, I'm a numbers guy.
He's following our money.
Yeah.
We all like dogs and cats. But
so we were fortunate enough in 2 years that I was there, we opened up 100 more franchise stores. We put another couple hundred in the pipeline, and then we were able to sell that to a private equity group. And right around then is when my son was born. My first son was born. I was fortunate enough that I was able to stay home for a year, with my wife and my son and experience that because for the last 10, 15 years, I was on a plane, really living on a plane. And what I decided to do after he turned a year was I was like, look, I'd like to find something where I don't have to get on a plane. And, Brian, you were talking about how you can't wait to get on a plane. And I get you. I've been living on a plane for 10 plus years.
Yeah.
But there's something about coming home to your family and kids, and you're missing out on stuff. And so I always said, if I can find a company down here in Miami that I can grow and still make it home and still be with my family, I think that's something that I'd really treasure.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think after this pandemic, everyone's probably learned how to adapt and work from home and realize you don't need to be in offices. Now, based on your business, Dave, are you going to keep some of the things you implemented moving forward with the order online and stuff like that? Because it seems like for a lot of restaurants up here, it's worked and they still keep it going. And it seems like it might be the thing of the future.
Yeah, listen, it is. I mean, look, I'll give you some metrics here. We were doing 9% delivery in 2019. We went up as high in March and April of last year to 75, 90%, like some weeks in terms of delivery. We ended the year in 2020 doing 33% of our sales through delivery. That's a big number. That's a big, big number. We're now down. Things have gotten, a little bit more normalized. We're probably down to about 20% delivery. But I got to tell you, I think people who have never done delivery before have been introduced to it, just like you said, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's here to stay. So yeah, we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doing delivery. We've had to make some adjustments though, right? So maybe for you, those of you who are in the restaurant business or some of your listeners, what we had before the pandemic was we had 4 or 5 tablets, up on our, there was a Uber Eats tablet, there was DoorDash, Grubhub, Postmates tablet. And if you ever walk into a restaurant, you see all these tablets. I was like, this is a disaster from an operational standpoint. And so we partnered with a company that basically created an integration, software program. And now all we have is one tablet, and basically all of our delivery orders go in through one tablet, and it's seamless, right? And for those of you who may be interested in something like that and have restaurants up in the Northeast or wherever you are, the name of the company that we partnered with was called Cuboh, Cuboh. And what it does for operations, you can imagine, it just makes it so easy for my employees. Imagine an employee dealing with the customer and dealing with 4 tablets.
Yeah.
And so it makes it that much easier. So yeah, to your point, I think delivery is here to stay. Thankfully, we raised prices on delivery because I don't know if you're aware, but they take a big chunk. These guys are not cheap for us. I know customers out there, for those of you who order online, you're probably doing what I do when my wife and I order, and you're like, damn, this is expensive.
Right.
But you're paying for convenience. But we get a huge fee charged to us. And so we've had to raise prices online, and unfortunately for us, there haven't been any pushback.